Great. Well, welcome and thanks for joining this morning. Oh, Mongolia. Oh, we got to chat afterwards.
Wow.
I'm a history buff. Indonesia. Hi all. Malawi. Okay, great. Well, I'm gonna kick things off. We're 1 minute after. Looks like everybody's streaming in here slowly. So my name's Scott Cuthbert. I'm one of the co-founders of Safeopedia, and we're a proud supporter of the Uncertainty podcast and everything that Gary Wong does. We we felt definitely there's a lot of technical content out there in the safety world, and we definitely strive to be a resource for safety professionals and safety advocates within organizations. Our podcasts, our webinars, all the content on our website is free if you're new to Safeopedia. We also run an annual virtual event, so watch for that. And we've launched a community for safety professionals to come together, support each other, and we provide premium content, premium experiences within the community as well. So we'll make sure to put links for all of that in the video below. And the uncertainty, podcast fits in, because again, there is so much technical content out there. We really want to help kind of expand readers and listeners' minds, get them thinking about, the complexity and non-safety disciplines such as cognitive neuroscience, anthropology, other things that affect, what we're going to dive into today with the uncertainty of safety culture improvement, engineered or emergent. So with that, I will turn things over to Gary Wong to introduce our guest and jump into the show today.
Well, thanks, Scott, for that introduction there. So I'm actually thrilled to be part of Safeopedia, particularly now because we are looking at trying to expand. And as you know, as humans, we're really good at creating regulations, standards, policies, compliance rules, best practices. This is awesome because it leads to certainty. Well, what we're trying to do in this show and this series is explore another region of the real world, one that isn't certain, consistent, and predictable, one that is really uncertain, as we say. Now, we associate certainty with the word robustness, and you'll hear us talk about that, and uncertainty with resilience. So what is robustness? Well, that's the ability to take a hit and keep on standing without changing. If some of you kind of are dated like me, it reminds me of the old Timex watch commercial. You could take a hit and keep on ticking. Resilience is the ability to survive a disruptive change that actually does happen. But it's also being alert and aware of changing conditions that may lead to unintended consequences before they happen. Well, what we're going to do today is explore that C word, culture, through the lens of uncertainty. The term safety culture, that was first used in a summary report way back in 1986 with the Chernobyl accident. Since then, as many of you probably know, there's been a number of definitions of safety culture that have been published. Culture is associated with people, relationships, and interactions. And if we drew a timeline showing how safety has evolved, one element could be how managers have treated workers over the time. So if we go back at the start of the 20th century, the 1900s, we had workers seen as cogs in a machine. Then we somehow evolved into workers as hazards to be constrained. Then we got a bit more enlightened. Then we moved into workers as heroes, adjusting to varying conditions. Well, today, we're going to look at workers as storytellers and the certainty of improving safety culture. The context we've chosen today will be safety culture in the aviation industry. So I'm really, really pleased to have commercial airline pilot James Burnell joining us. So James, can you tell us a bit more about what you're doing and how you're involved in this?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Gary. Hi, everyone. I'm James Burnell. I've been an airline pilot for a little over 25 years. Most of the reason I'm here today is I'm a safety rep for the British Airline Pilots Association. As part of that work, I collate, disseminate, and research safety theory. We host some webinars of our own, try and interview some relevant individuals, and bring along any sort of safety theories that we think might help our members. Yeah, that's about it really. We also pen a few articles as well on operational safety that get published around various articles, Eurocontrol, the sort of big aviation publications.
Hey, thanks, James, for that introduction. On my background, and Scott, if you want to spotlight that so people can see that. Okay, I like to use this diagram that Todd Conklin produced and presented some time ago. And I think it's it's an interesting depiction of how we look at safety within an organization or company. So if I bring up this diagram, and you can see there's a blunt end and a sharp end. Am I correct, James, that you're located at the sharp end?
Yeah, very much so, Gary. Pilots, all of us, so the ground maintenance crews, control center people, cabin crew, we're all there at the sharp end. A lot of my union work, obviously, is trying to influence people up and down the safety pole. But yeah, we feel the safety culture emerges from all parts of that diagram there.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks for that. So the topic today is about safety culture improvement. A popular approach is that a culture can be created in an organization. It can be designed and engineered, just like building a machine. Moreover, management can envision and craft an ideal safety culture. Design a few or designate a few, get some people together, probably the senior leaders, to craft a statement or a set of bullet points. Then we'll sell it to the people below. We'll hang posters on the walls to reinforce compliance. Oh yeah, and then we'll set measures to identify deviations from the ideal. Then we'll look at the gaps, and then we'll fix the behaviors to meet these targets here. So James, what are your thoughts on this approach?
Yeah, I mean, that's an approach we see a lot in aviation. It's very structured sort of organization. And I think it works well if you've got an extremely stable, certain, predictable environment. No real unexpected, uncontrolled external forces. Risks are known and mitigated with plans that are in place. Most importantly, if humans comply without question, then that system works very well. It's a sort of neat, linear, ordered system, and yeah, we'd refer to that as robust.
Yeah, and if you go back to what he said about how humans are treated, you can see how this works if you view people as cogs in a machine. People are error prone, so we need to take them out of the system, the production assembly line, if you like, and replace them with better people, and then we carry on. Well, what happens though if the context you're facing doesn't have certainty, consistency, or predictability? It's probably a non-linear complex system. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think everyone will experience this. Anytime you have confusion, dilemmas, sort of paradoxes, you know what it feels like in your everyday life. A different approach probably is needed in this sort of environment. We'd call that a resilient one that realizes that humans are not machines. Humans are dispositional in that they have a tendency to behave in a particular way, but there's no guarantees of it. This is because we all have unique experiences and adapt to situations through these experiences in different ways. So you can't guarantee anything there. I think of a complex adaptive, yeah, I think it is a complex adaptive system as you think about it. It's a sort of subtle but significant paradigm shift, or maybe even more around having a different lens through which to view the system. Neither robust or resilient lenses are right or wrong, but they give us agency in different ways. Instead of, certainly in a resilient side of things, instead of designing and engineering a culture, we manage a system that creates the conditions so that safety emerges. We're enabling the system to manage safety for us almost by being responsive to context and having adaptive capacity. It's able to focus not on fixing the behaviors, but changing the system conditions to enable our people to succeed.
Yeah,
That makes sense?
great. Yeah, and you can see how in the evolution of safety, how we've moved from error-prone workers to now looking at workers as heroes that can adapt to these changes, unexpected changes. And like I said, now looking at what some of those stories that they can share with us so we can get better. So I totally agree. This is not an either or, it's a both and. So let me pick up on that and explain why using a resilient, and I'll use the word sense-making as well, why using a resilient sense-making approach, it really opens doors that were previously unopened. And those are doors that, unfortunately, a robust approach cannot. So when we look at improving culture, we want to look at both as many doors as we can. And by the way, while I'm doing that, I'm going to touch on what we know from neuroscience, as Scott mentioned at the beginning, and also the social science of ethnography. So I think we're at that point now in safety where it's like we don't want to like circle the wagons and shoot in. We want to be able to like involve more disciplines. And what can we learn from neuroscience? What can we learn from ethnography? Well, ethnography is the study of humans, our societies, cultures, and evolution. Neuroscience tells us that the brain is efficient and uses processes that consume a minimal amount of energy. Ethnography recognizes that storytelling is natural for humans. It's easy to do, and hey, we're good at it. So when we want to share and pass on knowledge, the brain knows the easiest way to do that is in the form of stories. So just look at everybody out there, just look at what you do. How often during your day are you telling a story? It could be in a work situation, if you're in a master-apprentice relationship. How are you passing information down to apprentices if you're a master? Or it could be a peer-to-peer sort of relationship as well, as you talk to your coworkers. Now think about what you do in your families. How do you pass those stories down from generation to generation? You know, it's those things where like, which I love to watch, is the grandparent sharing a story about me down to my kid, right? So that's from generation to generation to generation. And that's how that sort of knowledge, and as part of knowledge, if you want to include rituals that you have in the family, all those sort of cultural things, that's all passed down as stories. But then we also have things like myths, legends of heroes and villains. We have fables that have a moral. So we have Grimm's fairy tales and we have Aesop's fables too. So what do you do at nighttime when you put your young child to bed? You read them a bedtime story, right? In safety, well, as we know, James, it might be a rumor that's sent through the grapevine. Or a narrative, easily remember it as, you know, don't do what Harold did. I mean, that's all you have to say. And then people ask, well, what did Harold do? And then the story is shared. Now, I feel sorry for Harold, but sorry, Harold, you're part of that sort of stories that get passed on here. So here's the tie with culture. As we said, culture isn't designed nor engineered, but is an emergent property of a complex adaptive system. Culture emerges from the everyday narratives that people are willing to tell each other. So as an ethnographer, or even as a manager or a safety professional, do you know what workers are talking about in their headquarters before the shift starts? Yeah, it could be about last night's sports scores, whatever, or what's in the news. But quite often, it's about their work as well. In the truck on the way to the job site, what are they talking about as well? Or perhaps on the way home in the carpool. So we could talk about workers, you know, wearing hard hats, but we could also talk about white collar workers too. As they come home and they kind of like get into the carpool, what sort of stories are they sharing about their day at the office? And even I'll go further and talk a bit about what are you or they sharing at the dinner table with their family. You know, if your child asks you, so Dad, what happened at work? Or Mom, what are the sort of things you do in your job? What sort of stories would emerge? In the aviation world, it's pilots sharing experiences with other pilots. This is the peer-to-peer. You know, and some things I've been heard is that there's a lot of stuff that happens in the hotel bar during the stopover, right? Well, I heard about that. Here's what I did when that happened to me. That kind of stuff isn't written down, but just passed along through word of mouth. All this stuff, James, seems to align with what we're learning from cognitive science research as well. So we've you know, when I first started off in management, I was told, well, you know, look at the brain as a computer. It's great for storing and retrieving information. But cognitive science, neuroscience has said, well, sorry, the brain is not built to store and retrieve information, but to recognize and make sense of patterns. So really, as humans, we're pattern recognizers. Well, narratives form patterns, and the brain can sense these. So now I'll bring in that other piece, which Scott talked about again, about the technology side of things. Well, I'm personally really excited that we've had a lot of advancements in data visualization software. So now we can take these qualitative narratives, we can do what we call signification, that's the process, and we can convert them into quantitative databases. And then once we've got quantitative databases, basically numbers, we can generate visual maps. So in other words, we now have the ability to see culture as patterns in an organization here. When I first discovered this a few years ago, it was one of those, oh my God, sort of moments here. Like, we always talk about culture, well, we can't see it. And if we can't see it, then it doesn't happen. It's, you know, it's like saying the thing like safety, you know, is one of those events that you can't see. It's a non-event. Well, now we can see culture, James, as a patterns. And this is really, really important because as leaders, we'll often say that we are on a journey to improve safety culture. Well, heck, any journey or trip that I went on, I made sure that I had a map. I'm not going to start off a journey and have no map. So guess what? Now we have a map. And this is a pretty cool map. And why it matters is because this map or maps are generated from the stories that the very people in improvement will impact. Okay. So far today, we've covered some of the whys and the whats of improving safety culture, but I think we want to move on to the how and talk about specifically applying them to the aviation industry. And maybe in your case, being a commercial pilot, operating a plane flying in the air. So let me draw your attention back to the safety sphere again. We know where you are, James. You're at the sharp end, sitting in the cockpit seat. So can you tell us who's at the blunt end?
Yeah, so I think the very furthest would be the politicians, and then moving down or sort of up towards the sharp end would be the regulators. For us would be the Federal Aviation Authority in America, or Civil Aviation Authority here, or EASA, which is the European regulator. They're very much at the blunt end. Yeah,
so what's the role that they play? If you look at the diagram, you can see that arrow that Todd's put on there is saying that the highest influence over the system, and it goes down towards the blunt end. And if there was another arrow, it would say that where most of the accidents take place are at the sharp end. So here are the people with the highest influence down here, being the furthest away from actually where the incidents and accidents take place.
Yeah, I think that is a big part of it. Yeah, down the blunt end, and that a lot of my work goes to that, to trying to inform them down the blunt end. So the politicians, we try to engage them when they create legislative acts, even the elected officials or in the regulators, so FAA, CAA, EASA, even ICAO, when they create regulations and standards. Not all are aligned, of course. Some of them, some have different views, which can create a wee bit of confusion. But they do have a lot of influence. But again, they're very far away from the sharp end, so not necessarily engaged entirely in that context where the accidents actually occur.
Yeah, okay. So if I can share one story that I heard when I was on a call with you with pilots. I think one of the pilots was saying that I think he was flying into the Middle East. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but as when you fly into the Middle East, you try to pick up your ground control, and he was having difficulties because they speak so many different languages. Is that
Yeah,
something
that's
you
certainly a
experienced?
problem. Yeah. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, the native air traffic control are meant to speak English, but they do speak their own languages sometimes. Certainly.
wow, okay, yeah. So I can see where maybe some confusion can take place because
Yeah, the situational awareness breaks down because you're not quite sure what's going on.
oh, okay, right, okay. So let's keep on moving down the safety spirit here. We talk about regulators, and obviously there's the influence of the customers. So we see now company and leaders, while they take these sort of regulations, they do a bit of interpretation. Maybe the leaders will take that and they'll create these safety visionary statements and maybe put a few policies in. And some of the companies I've seen, they will create the 12 golden rules sort of things,
Yeah.
post them on the wall, and everybody kind of like nods towards these things. Now that keeps on going down the line, and now we get the managers and supervisors. Well, they start designing safety systems with the professionals in the company or maybe external consultants, and they start designing the safety systems. And of course, everybody has an SMS, right? Safety management system. But they also put in compliance rules, maybe to follow the 12 golden rules, or maybe that's what they are. And also even get down way down the end, and they create these best practices. So what has your experience been?
Yeah, I think very much so. I think the distance and the pressure of the responsibility is a challenge psychologically. I think the most management personnel limit themselves to the single sort of robust lens view of the system, where it can be a machine, it can be perfected and fixed. It's a sort of command and control model, really. And this the illusion of control, allows them to sleep at night, and I don't blame them. They have a lot of responsibility for sure. The problem is that poor outcomes don't emerge from this world of structure and order. Obviously, no one's arguing this approach doesn't have utility, but it can't be the whole story. The real world is much more messy than that. I would say most of my work is around trying to free management from this singular or monocular view of the system.
Yeah. Scott, I just want to ask you the question. Has anybody put a comment or a question in the chat panel? If they haven't, we're asking people to, if they can, and if it's possible, James and I will respond to them as well. Anything come up yet?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I forgot that part in the intro, but I did put it in the chat, and no one's posted any questions yet.
Okay.
Checking the Q&A. No. So
yeah. If we have any pilots online, by the way, if you want to share a quick story about whether you agree or disagree with what we've said so far, please do so.
Oh, Trish has her hand up.
Okay.
I'll just allow Trish to talk here.
Sure. Hi, Trish.
Hi guys, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Thanks.
So I think one of the questions I have, and I love the dynamic of this topic and the way you're splitting out SMS to something that is more of a living, breathing system, if you will. I'm all about employee-owned, employee-directed safety. That's my niche. And so I've not had anything concrete that is understood that I could call it other than a fluid BBS. So for someone like me, where the clients are still seeing everything as a safety management system, and they're still resistant to even best practice, especially those that you're lucky to get them to want to put in place OSHA
Mhm.
requirements, right?
Yeah.
Because that's 95% of the employers we actually deal with, right? You guys are dealing with much higher level, higher profile companies that are willing to evolve. But for those of us that are trying to take what you're talking about and implement that within a known of a safety management system, but to make it a living, breathing, fluid, for lack of a better way of saying it, BBS, even though I hate the word BBS, I hate what it stands
Yeah.
for.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah.
If it's done right, it can be done like you guys are discussing, where essentially it's evolving, it's adaptive. This particular crew may work with different challenges than another crew, be it a global workforce, barriers, be it competency issues, be it what we're seeing with trying to hire people and them taking on just a warm body, all of the above. So one of the things that I'm hoping to get out of this is, how can I, as a consultant, take these limited mentalities that are lucky to even accept an SMS system and give them something that's palatable, that incorporates this living, breathing, adaptive system.
Great. So let me do this, Trish. Thanks for that. You are a great segue for a lot of the stuff we're going to cover. And if we don't cover it, by all means, make sure you come back on, and then let's make sure we close the loop with you. Okay? Is that?
Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I want to do, because you're not alone. We see a lot of that. We know that the robust approach with regulations and everything else, that's important. That's what we talk about at both ends. We're not saying get rid of that and put this in. No, we want that. And thank God we got that, because we will be having accidents every day. And thank God we don't. It's that last little bit that, how do we stop that? And that's where it's going to take us into this next piece. So permit me to carry on. And like I said, Trish, if I don't cover that well enough, let's bring you back on there and let's make sure we do that for you. Okay? So all these rules and regulatory conditions that you talked about, James, they enable a safety culture to emerge. So now that's a different view, right? It's not we're going to create and design. We're going to let things emerge. So can you carry on with that and tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So the safety systems at the moment are designed to enable certainty to emerge. And if we do that, well, I mean, brains certainly like this, because it reduces the amount of energy that you have to expend. It's easy to understand what you're doing and in theory do it. It's good for strengthening robustness, and we see results obviously in the aviation industry. My word, it's very safe. I think approximately 1 in 1.2 million chance of being involved in an accident. Only 5 fatal accidents in 2022 out of 32.2 million flights. So it certainly works, that's for sure. Understandably, aviation crashes make the news, and they fall into the sort of realm of disasters. There's a lot of pressure on the blunt end to eliminate those fatalities, and at the moment it feels like we're trying to squeeze the last bit of toothpaste out of the tube.
Wow. That's squeezing the last bit of toothpaste out of the tube. I must admit I do that. I'm kind of a cheap guy, so I want to get that last bit out before I go buy a new one. But I know when I'm squeezing, I'm going like, man, am I putting a lot of time and effort just to save a few pennies? And now I know that, well, the brain doesn't like that, right?
Yeah.
Oh, what about
Yeah,
sponsors?
sorry, yeah.
How do you feel about that?
So yeah, I feel that obviously anyone who's trying to improve culture change, it has the best intentions in mind. Uncertainty, however, means there are no if-then cause and effect relationships that we can rely upon. So we've got to that we have to know that the consequences will emerge from our actions, and they can potentially be unintended consequences.
And James, do you know what else can emerge? Danger, right?
Yeah.
So, we can design and engineer the system conditions that enable safety to emerge, but if we overdo it, danger, not safety, can emerge. Here's an example that I've had when I was working in charge of line crews. I started off and we had a nice pocket guide book, fit in your back pocket, workers, because there was a few safety rules and they were helpful. But over time, we noticed that we would get another batch of rules, now the pocket guide has become a little bigger 3-ring binder. We kept on adding more and more rules. The guide kept on growing bigger and bigger. So it got to that point where it was so big, it was left on the desk or in the truck. So I looked at that and realized that, my God, we've created a system of too many rules. And what we saw in terms of unintended consequences was an emergence of danger in the form of working confusion, annoyance, frustration, distraction, all those sort of things here. And because there were so many rules, the brain was cognitively overloaded and they couldn't remember, what do I do? And as you said at the earlier part, if I recall, you run into these dilemmas. And then we would have these dilemmas like, well, according to the rule book, if I follow rule A, I'm going to be in conflict with rule B. So what should I do? That creates that bit of confusion for the worker. No longer a best practice because maybe some novel situation has emerged that wasn't there when the rules were first created. Now it has. So what do you want the worker to do? This is it. And yeah, it may have to go back to the safety professionals who have now we need to rethink this. Maybe come up, maybe not with another rule, but maybe to adjust it, or maybe to eliminate a rule. Don't know at this point. Well, when I hear stories like these, I don't bother carrying the safety manual with me. We call these weak signals because what they're doing for us is they're alerting us to pending danger. So, Trish, if I can use you, if you're there and you're kind of talking with the different people along the safety sphere, it doesn't always have to be the frontline workers. It could be a manager, a crew leader. It could be somebody in the C-suite. But if you're hearing these stories like, hey, don't bother, or I got a bad feeling about this, these are what we call weak signals. And your little antenna should be going beep, 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 and picking these things up here and saying, what could be emerging from this? Safety or danger? And if an accident occurs, we typically learn doing the investigation that weak signals were ignored, and they seem so glaringly obvious in hindsight. One experience I had was exactly that, where there was an accident, and then typically after the big formal investigation, a year and a half later, we get the accident report, then we read it out in the morning on the safety meeting. And one of the couple of fellows said, oh, I could have told you that. We knew about that. And it got to me like, we knew about that a year and a half ago? Why didn't you tell us about that? And I got different stories. One, we tried to tell you guys, but you wouldn't listen. Or the other side was, we didn't bother because we know you weren't going to listen. So I'm going like, how do we get ourselves in this situation here? So number one, if you're going to be a good consultant or a good safety professional, you got to be listening for these weak signals.
Yeah, for sure. It's a definite concern I have. it's the blunt end dictating a robust approach to fix resilient safety culture problems is always a problem, and safety experts coming in and seeing everything as a nail and using their favorite hammer, even if it's a screw. Striving for certainty means that we probably want to control. We want to control people, processes, technology, break down or reduce the problem into small parts, fix those separately and trying to put them back together. I think using the appropriate tools for maybe it means increasing risk that unintended negative consequences emerge. So, sorry, the inappropriate tools can increase the chances of unintended consequences. And these show up as surprise in the system quite a lot, as Gary says, especially if you're not listening to the narrative and hearing the weak signals. I mean, the signals are sort of, as Gary says, it's covered a lot of it. It's refusal or protest behavior, mistrust towards the company. I mean, you could go as far as out of sight sabotage, I guess. And as we mentioned earlier, humans are dispositional, so a change for the greater good, a change from the sort of attitude of the greater good, what's in it, to what's in it for me, adapting in order to survive.
So if anybody's having, like scratching your head about what do you mean by disposition, though, just think about if you have kids, if you're a mother or if you're a father here, and look at your kids. Let's pick on teenagers. We always do. So one day your teenager does this, next day your teenager does that, and you're going like, what's a switch? Well, no, I'm not a psychologist, by the way, but if you examine that, realize that your child receives some sort of feedback, some sort of unintended consequences, and that caused that your daughter or your son to adapt, change their behavior. Now, change your behavior, better for worse, we don't know. Maybe we observe it that it's worse, but it could be better for them. And I'll use my daughter. I think she's not around, so I can do that. Where she had that situation where it changed, and then you do a little bit of exploring, and you find it's all about her wanting to fit in with the group, right? And then so you understand, okay, that culture of trying to fit in the group is very, very strong. And I think what we're trying to do now is say, okay, can we go beyond trying to fix behaviors? Because that would be the mistake. I would make it, okay, daughter, you got to stop doing this. Don't do that anymore. What does that do? It just creates worse situation probably, because they're trying to find their boundaries. To one where, so what are the systemic conditions that's causing my daughter to behave that way? Then we did that in the town that I grew up in. You ended up talking to the other parents and you find out their daughters and sons are behaving the same way. So now you're into something different here. This is like, I think, what we call the resilient approach. You're trying to figure out what are the changes. So let me go back to that thing about unintended negative consequences, particularly impacting the aviation safety culture. So can you just share some things that you've come across? Because this is where you live.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's quite specifically aviation. Well, I mean, I guess people face this quite across a lot of industries now in the modern world, but a focus on profit and the ever increasing power of non-safety related departments over the frontline operations. I mean, this has probably been in the news for everybody around the world with Boeing, with the highlighting. I mean, they aren't the first or the worst possibly, but they have certainly been highlighted by some very poor outcomes. The FAA review of Boeing's safety management system stunningly reveals how a major company can understand or fail to understand and facilitate information flow up and down the sphere. There's a European Cockpit Association, which is represents it was a collaboration of all the unions across pilot unions across Europe. They have a documentary about the European safety regulator that indicates undue influence by economic pressures from industry stakeholders. I mean, every part of our system in Europe is under pressure at the moment. Airports, AT, traffic control functions, engineering, becoming as it becomes over optimized for one factor, say monetary reasons, then resilience reduces. So these ever increasing stresses are a problem for safety, because they put pressure on the frontline crews at the sharp end of the spear, and they drain the resources, because adaptive capacity of workers takes quite a lot of energy. So the resilience of the system starts to break down, and if there's no recognition of that resilience in there and the need for it, then we're going to face some quite serious problems. Yeah, I think from a frontline pilot viewpoint, the lack of understanding is shown in the UK airlines. The airlines have removed the crew rooms that we used to congregate in before flights, and this has put some pressure on the crews, because you're reporting directly to the aircraft, so there isn't that mixing of people anymore. So as Gary talks about narrative, you don't have that rich information flow through informal channels. Informal channels are really good because they allow any sort of information to flow. They're not as restrictive of safety management systems. So these sort of things make the system much more responsive, even though they're not explicitly created or designed or maintained. They are actually vital in the frontline safety.
Wow. Yeah, I can see how the removal of crew rooms, that's going to save us real estate costs and reduce our expenses here. It'd be, I guess, the equivalent of that would be, okay, you're going to go work on a job site. So why don't you set a meeting first in the bullpen, as I used to call it, or their headquarters? You just wait by the truck that's going to drive you to the site. Then you can go there and then go start work. So you're right, we lose that interaction. And it could be, yeah, it could be sports stories, or what happened about, yeah, my daughter's being bullied by whatever, all those sort of things that happen. Or it could be like, that thing that we did yesterday, I'm not so sure if that was safe. Should we do that again? We've been having, sadly, a review of crane safety accidents where I live in British Columbia. And now, of course, because of that, people got involved and questioning here. One of the things I would look at, again, is those weak signals. I would suspect that those weak signals were always there from the workers, whether they were the ones hurt or not hurt, and were they just ignored? Don't really know. Okay. So if I go back to what you've just told us, would I be accurate, James, in saying that the people with the most influence, i.e. the blunt end, they seem to be stuck in this? There is a perfect safety management system to be found in there somewhere. It's like, let's squeeze that last bit of toothpaste out.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, when you hear language like about idealized future states, root cause analysis, linear cause and effect relationships, it's a sort of traditional systems thinking philosophies that are very deeply ingrained. I've been working on trying to acknowledge these, or get the airlines to acknowledge the existence of complexity as a branch of science, and the phenomena that this brings to our understanding of the systems. I think the holdover from systems thinking, although I don't want to be lynched by the systems thinking people, because these guys are definitely trying to build all this stuff in at the moment, but as it's seen in the airlines, there's not a real recognition of emergence of self-organization, non-linearity, entanglement. So as a complex system, it'll throw up unknowables, it'll throw up unimaginables, things that we can't possibly deal with. So there's sort of millions of unique events in our operation all the time. And we can't look into the past to find them. We can't imagine them. So we can't build specific responses to them. So this is where resilience comes in. We need to have a new lens to add on and have a sort of a binocular approach, almost, so two lenses on the system.
Yeah, but let me repeat, we need both robustness and resilience. And I sense, though, there is an overemphasis on certainty and not enough on uncertainty.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of airlines do sort of big data projects, AI safety management projects, to try and find ever weaker signals within the system. Lots of data going through, but not much context. So they spend extraordinary amounts of money on this, trying to pick up these weak signals. But this is all in the robust domain, all in the area where they've created order. And because it's not looking at context, it's questionable as to whether it's picking up unknowables, unimaginables in that sort of uncertainty space. I mean, it reminds me very much of the cover of Gary Klein's book, Streetlights and Shadows, if anybody's a fan of that, where a guy drops his keys at night while he's walking to his vehicle and chooses to look for them under the streetlight. A passerby offers to help and says, "Where did you lose them?" He said, "Well, over by the bushes." And they say, "Well, why are you looking under the streetlight?" "Well, because this is the easiest place to see." It's that sort of mentality. Was the blunt end, and company leaders need to start realizing that uncertainty is here to stay, and you need to a different approach to start to respond to that. So this uncertainty and novel outcomes is something yet to be learned. There's no value placed in different ways of learning at the moment, adaptive capacity, humans in general, as much as there should be. So I think that's where we're at, Gary.
Yeah, right. And I just want to pick up on a comment that Trish has put on there. In her experience, it looks like some companies are just simply going back to this disposable worker mentality. Yeah, let's go look under the street light, because that's where the light has been shined the most. And they're not looking at that darker spaces. Well, we're suggesting you got to look at the bright and the dark spaces together there. Now, we're trying to have this, the uncertainty showed to be a lot of practicality. So we want to spend the last part onto the how side. We've done a lot of the whys and the whats, so we can carry on forever. But we want to start looking at how. So James, let me ask you the question. Where do we start to make safety culture improvements? From what you've shared and we've talked about so far, it's obvious we don't start with a blank sheet, a green field. So if you're a consultant out there, a safety professional, and you want to say there, we're going to start blank, sorry, it doesn't happen that way. And that's the brain for you. The brain has history and it can't forget that, right? So we got to appreciate that aviation safety has an existing culture, and this has a history of good and bad experiences. And it ain't going to happen with the big change initiative either. So what sort of small steps can we begin with?
I think approaching with an idea of the industry as a whole, so we're not breaking parts out and trying to put them back together. So, and then that means we need to engage with stakeholders up and down the safety sphere, and them understanding the position they're in and the influence they have. So we engage positively with these influencers. We don't ignore the people who resist. There are always going to be people who resist, and possibly rightly so. It's worth challenging ideas. But you can't, as we pull out knowledge from this, you can't force people to volunteer their knowledge. But as you bring them along and invite them to participate, then actually people find it quite an enjoyable experience. Narrative is a great way to get this sort of information flowing. And it initially doesn't have to be necessarily an explicit activity. As I said before, we can do this by stimulating informal networks. So bringing crew rooms back, or the equivalent in your industry, spaces that connect people, allow stories to flow. You don't have to control all this sort of information. Not everything needs to be explicit. A complementary approach, as Gary discussed earlier, would be building visual maps that represent the present culture. Makes it easy. You have to make it easy for stakeholders to share their stories. A key challenge is to get people to look for weak signals, but also to be able to allow others to actually pay attention to them. We can make it faster and cheaper with than traditional surveys, and use some narrative software tools, as Gary said. And they allow connection 24/7, so people can. It's a very low energy way for people to put stories into the system. That ongoing narrative data also enables the maps to be continually updated. So we have a moving map almost, so we can see how possibly see how our own interventions are helping the system, or lack thereof. Yeah, so you can build a dashboard with these, and what we're saying is we're not replacing safety management systems, big data reporting systems. They can work quite happily in conjunction with these. We can test our ideas that we find out before we implement them. So today's topic is safety culture improvement. So how do we know if we're making progress? So as we say, we don't need to measure numbers as a count. We can, that's sort of more robust thinking. We monitor change over time and how patterns are changing as we change the systemic conditions around the operation that we're managing. In fact, yeah, the conditions. Sorry, we can ask what conditions might we change to get more desirable stories like these and fewer unfavorable stories like those. I think it's a good question to start the movement of where we can go.
Yeah, this is probably a whole new topic for another certainly show. What James just talked about here, but you don't have to use software technology. You can even do manual. Like if you're just meeting with your crew in their natural headquarters and just getting them to share stories, you're going to get some positive, you're probably going to get some negative stories. Then all you have to do is ask them the intervention question. So what can we change in order to get more stories like you told, which were favorable, Bill, as opposed to John, that bad story that you just shared? And I'm sure these guys will say there, well, why don't we just change this rule, change this practice, whatever. And if you do this in a very quiet way and make these changes, you're improving your safety culture, because what will emerge will be more favorable stories, fewer. But the best part about it, these sort of solutions or ideas came from the workers themselves. How good is that, right? I'm a firm believer that in some cases, when you got a big problem, everybody wants to go outside and bring in the experts, the big four consulting companies, when really all you have to do is just look within the company and the answers are there. And my past experience has been, people have been saying, I've been waiting for somebody to ask me. I could have told them this. Once you hear that, you wonder, like, what other stories or comments are out there that we need to gather, and then make the blunt end, the company, the C-suite, make them aware of it. So like I said, that could be a whole different session. And there's a group of us that are exploring that, how we can make narratives maps better. So just so that we're all clear, I'm a sports fan. So I'm going to use a sports analogy to illustrate how a safety culture improvement could be implemented. Well, James, you're in Edinburgh, so I'm sure you're thinking about soccer. Well, I'm in Vancouver, Canada, so hey, it's ice hockey for me. We know that, when we play the game, keeping a score or tally is rudimentary. We have a scoreboard So during the game, we're allowed to make adjustments. We can say, it's the end of the second period, it's at halftime. We know the game's not over yet, but we know. But we have a scorecard, which is the end of the game. Well, if you always look in the scorecard, it's a little bit too late. The game is over. You know, the result is in. How does big data enter? Well, big data answers the what, the who, when, where question here. What's the score? Who's winning? When is it over? When is the game being played? And I know in hockey, we get really, really big in data analytics here. And we have these magical 3-letter acronyms, TLAs, PDO, and everything else to kind of analyze what's happening in the game. While the narrative data answers the why question. Why are we playing poorly? Why is the coach playing that formation? Why is so-and-so on the bench? So narrative data is all about learning while the game is on. And if we have maps, these maps can reveal patterns that help us understand why people behave the way they do. Then know what system conditions we can change to adjust undesirable behaviors that are enabling bad consequences to emerge. If the match is going well, hey, the maps can complement game stats, informing coaches and players why a strategy is working, and therefore probably stay on course. But if not going well, coaches might decide to try an educated hunch to shake things up on the pitch. It could be a different tactic that is safe to try. In other words, no one gets hurt or won't cost you the game, so it's not that risky. And then you can use these maps to monitor feedback and how players on both sides are reacting to the change. And this includes picking up on those weak signals, such as, hey, our players look confused. Well, the attitude of the referee looks like he's a bit changing here. Not quite sure what's going on. Now, since the match result is uncertain until the final whistle is heard, the strategy for any game is to continually probe, sense, and respond. Then you watch the action unfold. The smart coaches and players, they're always on ready alert to disrupt patterns and allow better ones to form. So in hockey or soccer, or for that matter, any sport where you've got two competing teams, this isn't a dramatic paradigm leap, but more of a nuanced shift. An example that we always see is a team notices that a key defender is injured. So the players and coaches, they change their tactics to pounce on that unexpected opportunity. Maybe they pick on the new defender who's maybe not an experiencer, and they just take advantage of that poor guy and try to score a goal that way. Now, in complexity science, Stuart Kaufman calls this the adjacent possible. There is all of a sudden a new pathway that has just opened up because something unexpected, somebody got hurt. It happens. Now, that's all part of resilience, and the whole idea of the resilient sense-making approach leverages the adjacent possible. What we're really looking at right now and suggesting is we take the combination of knowledge from neuroscience and ethnography and data visualization, technological skills, so that we can open a different path to improve safety culture.
Yeah, for sure. I think, with improving safety culture, obviously the game's never over. It's an evolution. And the beauty of storytelling is the same. It follows the evolution of the system. We're talking about sustainability or the sort of persistence of the system. And for that, we need evolution. We can't have stagnation. So culture emerges from the narratives that everyday people are willing to tell each other. And we can continue to collect them in real time and help everyone from the safety sphere to make better informed decisions, and not necessarily we need to use the resilience lens to create that adaptive capacity that might be needed. But we can also see maybe our robust approaches are overdone somewhat, and we can trim that back and use those resources somewhere else where they might be better applied.
Yeah, cool. One of my colleagues that's working with this is Michael Chevel-Dave. And Michael, I see that you've put a really good chat commenter about stimulating. Scott, can we open up Michael's? And Michael, if you're okay, can you come on and maybe share, because you've had a lot of experience with storytelling and narrative maps. Michael, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there. Scott just unmuted me. Hi, Gary. Hi, James. Scott. Yeah, no, it's one of the things that when I work with clients in complex challenges in safety, obviously, in the human side of safety is one of them, is if we are detecting weak signals. So if we have some form of narrative sensing, scanning, whether we do it through just a purposeful and disciplined engagement to gather in training sessions or other, or if you're using some sort of software to gather narrative across a much larger population. One of the questions to ask is, how do you actually respond and react to some of the weak signals that perhaps you need to be paying attention to? And it could be a positive reinforcement signal. So you might find weak signals of cultural shifting that is building resilience in the organization. And one of the things that I stress to leaders working in this field is don't always try broker the narrative exchange through some safety group or some central organization or the executive that's responsible for the safety. Is how do you change the environment so you create more opportunities for natural storytelling or exchange to occur? One example of this, if some of the audience members have read Steve Jobs' biography, I think that was the official one that was released soon after he passed away. There's a story in there about when he created a new headquarters. I think it was for Pixar, and he was in an argument with I guess the project team about the desire to put one set of washrooms for the entire facility. And the compromise is they put two sets, but they put a huge sort of casual gathering space and near the cafeteria where there's sort of social environments. And that stimulated, the purpose is to stimulate serendipitous interaction in a social setting so that narrative can more naturally flow. Now, I've had some of my friends are pilots here in Canada, and I think if memory serves me correctly, there were some efforts and oftentimes in a desire to make processes more efficient, some of the environment or crew gathering places and time in those places where it's deemed to be inefficient are taken away. And sometimes the unintended consequence there is you actually limit the interaction space where naturally occurring narrative can occur. So I guess my point to the comment there is don't underestimate the value of these, even if they're short 5-10 minute sort of crew social interaction environments where these stories are naturally flowing and occurring. And one area that I think we've talked, James and Gary and others that have a chat line in this area is how do we actually enhance the density of those interactions, and training environments, whether they're with real stories or hypotheticals, is an interesting area. So that was my reason for highlighting that.
Great, Michael. I appreciate you piping in there. I think some of the experience you've had really shows that we are on a good track to look at resilience and looking at humans as storytellers. Before we sum it up, Trish, I just want to check with you. Have we given you some ideas on what you could do to maybe help in what you're trying to do? Either you can come online or else just put something in the chat panel. I want to make sure we've closed the loop with you.
Yeah, she's got her hand up here, so we'll bring
Yeah.
her on stage.
Great. Hey,
Yeah, you've given me some good food for thought. Again, it's trying to be able to talk the talk to the types of clients I'm dealing with versus the high profile companies that are looking at world-class safety. And that's a huge delineation. You know, that what you guys deal with is way above what I get the opportunity to deal with. So it's a struggle all the time. But I did want to chime in with, again, I am all about employee-owned, employee-directed safety. And I even tell them, the workers, regardless of what your company provides for you, you are the ones that affect safety the most. You are the ones that have to watch out for each other, share information with each other, keep those communication lines open, watch out for each other. And one of the things that I'm always encouraging, and I tell every single foreman or supervisor during your morning, if you do a JSA meeting, if you do just a gathering as you're getting your tools together, whatever you're doing, take that time and take turns every day. Someone from your crew not only has to have a head on their swivel, especially if you're offsite, what's changed. Let's talk about SIMOPS conditions. Let's talk about whatever we have to address for hazards, but what's going on in your life? What kind of things have you had to deal with? And what are some solutions you've come up with? Or how can we brainstorm with that? Because number one thing in safety is making sure your workers feel valued and have some control over quote unquote ownership of their work and their company. And I just believe that when you have the company that says that's inefficient time, just get in there, hustle, get to work. Well, these guys are talking anyway. So
yeah.
let's guide them. Let's give them that open, not like we have to hide behind the corner to talk about safety, to talk about how we can change things at this level to keep us safe, regardless of what the company says. So I want to thank you guys for putting this on. I really hope that there's a bigger movement back away from this. I'm seeing it everywhere where it's going so far backwards. Employees are made to feel disposable. If you don't like it, there's the door. If they have suggestions or concerns, again, it's just, if you don't like it, there's the door. And it's very, very sad when we've seen safety come so far, and those who have the world-class mentality, that's fantastic. But again, at least 95% of the companies out there do not have that mentality across the globe.
Yeah. Thanks for your comments, Trish. And I'm glad we've given you some ideas. You've actually given me a couple of thoughts that just popped in my mind. One of them is this thing about, it always starts with leadership. It always starts at the top. No, I think what we're trying to suggest, it's everywhere in the safety sphere. It could be with anybody, and anyone really could be a leader to do that. The other thing too, where we like a bit about collecting stories is, again, maybe the new leader that comes on and says, oh, I want to talk to and meet with everybody in the company. Maybe you can do that in a small firm with maybe 10 or 12 people. But if you're dealing with even like 30 or 40, I would suggest to that CEO, if you're spending all the time talking with the employees looking in, who's looking after us by looking out? What's coming over the horizon? Who's looking at the weak signals about some of the new dangers that are emerging in technology or other things here? I think that's your role. So let us help you by giving you this dashboard, as James talked about, where you don't start by looking at a whole mess of stories, 3,000, 4,000 stories. You won't get through that. What we know is that these stories form patterns. What we want to bring to your attention, maybe at a glance, is what are the patterns that you see forming? that's where your attention goes to. Your eyes are drawn to where these clusters are, and then you can go like, oh, that makes me curious. Is there something there that we need to look at and probe and fix? I think that's how at the leadership side of things, where this, decision makers are, you can help them figure out, what should we do first? Well, you kind of go where maybe you're seeing a lot of undesirable stories because there's something there. But at least now you do have a vision of where you want to go. And that's towards more favorable stories. So again, this is where, as James says, these sort of narrative maps complement. And before I just close off and summarize, if you think, readers, that you would like to see us do a session on how we can actually use narrative maps to complement big data, let us know, and then we can put something together for a future show in Safelopedia here. So I just want to sum up now, because we have gone past our hour, and although we're not hard stop on the top of the hour, Scott. But to sum up, I think what we've done is offered a different view of culture. Not one that can be engineered, but one that emerges naturally from systemic conditions. And we use the aviation industry as an example, but heck, I think it also applies to all land, sea, air transportation industries, be it railroads, trucking, maritime shipping. Why? Because they're all complex adaptive systems. And each has its own blunt end to sharp end safety spear. So James, I'm going to give you the final word and say, what 3 takeaways would you like to leave with the viewers?
Yeah, so I think the first and most important here is that uncertainty is here to stay forever, no matter what we do. And because of that, we need a robust and resilient approach. And we're not going to get the last bit of toothpaste out of the tube by doing the same thing, only harder.
Great stuff. Okay. Well, Scott, I'm going to turn it back over to you. And I just want to give my personal thanks for everybody coming on. Michael, Tricia, for sharing your comments with us. Back to you, Scott.
Yeah, I would echo that. It was a great discussion today. Super happy James and could join us, and Gary could host, and thanks for Trish and Michael, and I think there were MJ, a few other people's comments and suggestions in the chat. So thank you very much for that. That's always great to see. This will be recorded and available on demand. So if you obviously want to rewatch or share with colleagues or coworkers, it'll be available to do that. And as Gary mentioned, if you've got suggestions for future shows, or if you'd like to be a guest even, just reach out, let us know, and we'll follow up with you. We put James's coordinates in the chat so people can connect with him on LinkedIn, and the resource that he mentioned, I think, at the beginning of the episode, and his emails. So be respectful, but I know James is very generous and would love to hear from you.
I would.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining, and we look forward to the next one.
Thanks all.
Thanks very much.
Take care.
Appreciate it.